senior producer from NFL Films, Greg Cosell, joining us to talk Bills-Rams and Greg Cosell's weekly segment presented by Scott Lawn Yard, an official commercial site work partner of the Buffalo Bills. Good afternoon, Greg. Got an interesting one here this week out on the left coast, and the Rams have been a tricky team to figure. They had a lot of injuries at the beginning of the season, including Nakua and Kupp, both out for a stretch. Linemen out, left, right, and center on their offensive line, and it really set them back. They get off to a 1-4 start, but now they've won 5 of their last 7. Matthew Stafford has 14 touchdown passes since Week 8. What kind of a team are they now?
Well, I think they're really well defined, and we can kind of walk through this a little bit, guys, because offensively and defensively, I think they're really defined. And, offensively, everyone knows what Sean McVay does. So what you have to defend with them, obviously, the run game is a starting point. It used to be all zone. It is not anymore. There's a lot of duo. There's a lot of gap scheme. It's a far more multiple run game that many might remember sort of in the years just before and just after the Super Bowl when it was Todd Gurley. So the run game is far more multiple, but it's the pass game that's really can be really special. And what you deal with in the pass game, number one, is heavy 11 personnel. They're probably 90% 11 personnel. They play with 3 wide receivers almost on every snap. You're going to get a lot of what we call reduced and cut splits, where the wide receivers line up close to the formation. Number 2, there's a ton of motion, shifting and motion. They have movement before the snap on, I would bet, 85% of their offensive plays. It's a heavy movement before the snap offense. And you must defend the middle of the field in the passing game. Between the numbers, between the hashes, Stafford is as good an anticipation window thrower as any quarterback in the league. You think of someone like Jared Goff, who's next up. But that's kind of what their offense is. It's really well defined. You know what you have to defend.
And with Stafford, it doesn't look from this end, and certainly he was never a Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson, but he seems like he's playing very well beyond the years would say he could.
Well, I got to tell you, Steven, you've been doing this a long time. You've seen a lot of quarterbacks. He still throws the ball about as well as anybody in the league. He was making all these kinds of off-platform throws well before Patrick Mahomes. It's just nobody took note of it because he was playing for a bad Detroit team. But he is as gifted a thrower as we've seen in this league. And, I don't want to say maybe ever, but that's possibly the case. I mean, this guy is a really gifted thrower. Now, as his career has progressed, while I wouldn't call him immobile and a statue, he certainly doesn't look to move. And he's not necessarily going to create plays with his legs, but you can do the design boot play action pass game with him. You can get him out of the pocket by design, but you need to pressure him, and the pressure, needs to come from up the middle. That's really where you want to be able to sort of shut him down, because he's one of those guys that he will wait. He will be a late in the down pocket quarterback. He's not looking to get out of there. He's looking to wait and make throws. So he will stay there, and therefore there can be times when he does get sacked, depending on the opponent and depending on the flow of the game. But their offense is they do a whole lot on offense. Now, my guess is that because the Bills play a lot of too high, which kind of balances your defense, that they won't have to make a ton of adjustments to movement. You won't see them start having to communicate a ton because the secondary will be balanced, as opposed to when you're single high and you've got a strength and a weakness, and you see teams have to communicate. They probably won't have to communicate as much as some other teams.
Looking at the Rams defense, defending the run has been a persistent problem for them. I realize that the Saquon Barkley field day a couple of weeks ago may have skewed the numbers for them a little bit.
Yep.
But all that being said, it seems like teams have employed a downhill style run game from under center, and it's worked very well against them for most of the season. What have you seen with their run defense deficiencies?
Well, it's funny you say that because, I think as the seasons progress, because they play Brownie, as you know, a lot of young players, and they've got good players in their front, um, and I think they're getting better. The numbers might not reflect it, and your point's absolutely correct about the Barkley game. Obviously that skews it, but when you look at guys like Fisk, Kobe Turner, 91, is a really good player. On the edges, which is different than what you were speaking about, but they've got Young, a second-year player. They've got Verse, who has a speed to power pass rusher, even as a rookie, might be as good as there is in the league. I mean, he just puts offensive tackles on their back sometimes. Maybe it's the linebacking core because I think what they're doing is they're playing. They have multiple fronts that they play with. So depending on the front, they play Roseboom, who's I think not a bad player, but maybe you want better. And Spates he's kind of he's really a backup who's been forced to play due to injury. And then they've got Michael Hoyt, who's kind of their do-everything wild card player, who lines up both on the ball and off the ball, depending on their fronts and their use of personnel. But I think they've got good people. It just, they're young players, and it just hasn't quite come together enough to be a stronger run defense. But in terms of pass rush, that's where I think they can be really difficult.
Yeah, we've seen, the tapes and everything of them. Their pass rush is really what they want to do, and certainly they're young and athletic.
Yep.
Is there a type of running game that teams have been using, like every team is trying against these guys because they are susceptible? Is it the duo concept, zone rush, the wide zone? I mean, what are teams doing that is allowing them to rush on these guys? I mean, every team seems to run it a little differently, but do they all kind of gravitate towards one philosophy?
Well, if you're in base, okay, and we'll see what the Bills decide to do. And by the way, what's Kincaid's issue? Is he going to play or is he still out?
Don't know yet, but he is practicing this week on a limited basis, so it's kind of a wait and see.
Okay, obviously that could dictate what their personnel packages are for the game, but when they play base, the Rams, that is, they're basically a 5-2 front. They play with, 3 interior guys. Sometimes it's kind of a bare front where they're all tight, and sometimes it could be spread out a little more, but it's a 5-2 front. So, teams are going to run zone concepts against them. I think you'll definitely see some gap scheme as well because you can get those angle leverage blocks. And you can kick out the widest defender on the line of scrimmage, whether that be Young or Verse, or sometimes it's Hoyt, excuse me. So I think you've seen multiple run game concepts against them, depending on the personnel. One thing they've really gravitated toward over the last 4 or 5 weeks is when they go, they play some big nickel now. That's become a big part of what they do with the rookie Kinchins from the University of Miami playing as the third safety. So he's the third safety with Curl and Lake. And by the way, Lake's a really intriguing player because Lake kind of can play the slot. He can play on the back end. He can blitz. In some ways, Lake is a lot like Brian Branch of the Detroit Lions, who's a terrific player, but that kind of versatility. So they play a lot of big nickel. For instance, last week against the Saints, of course, the Saints played a large majority of the game in some form of base personnel. They did not play one snap of what you'd call conventional nickel, where they actually played with 3 true corners. So Witherspoon, who's their third corner, did not play one snap last week, and he was active. So I think it's on the outside, believe it or not, at the corner position where you probably feel like you can attack them. Now, as long as you can protect, I think you feel like you can attack them on the outside versus Williams and Durant.
Right, that's what I was going to ask. If they go big nickel, that's still not, fully committed to being big and heavy and stopping the run. I mean, they're just they're a little bit like Buffalo in that respect, right?
Yeah. I mean, these are, as the season has evolved, as you know, Steve, teams make adjustments based on personnel and how they feel they play best as the season progresses. And they've made these 2 changes. They play big nickel, and then they're a heavy dime team on third down, heavy dime. They bring in Jalen McCullough, who's about 6 feet, 205, and he's their dime. So, for instance, they very often play dime with 4 safeties, and Lake, in a sense, becomes their slot corner. So that's what they've done a lot. We'll see what they do this week, because as I said, Witherspoon is normally their third corner, but he didn't play a snap last week.
Right.
And then with respect to those outside corners, that was going to be my next question. You kind of touched on it already. What has it been that has made them so vulnerable? Is it a skill set issue where they just don't have the strength to hold up in one-on-one matchups, or are they being left out on islands to a degree and it's backfired? What has been your general review of why they've been victimized from time to time on the outside?
Yeah, I think you're dealing with the fact that it's tough. Williams is a feisty, competitive kid, but he's small. And again, they're playing what they think is best based on their personnel, and it's not for me to say they're right or wrong. They know their players better than I, and they're playing the best players that they feel fit what they do. But I think Williams at his core is a slot corner. I don't think he has enough size to really match up on the perimeter. And as tough and competitive as he is, which you love, I think that he can be beat on the outside. They don't, and Durant is also probably best as a slot corner. So to me, they have two slot corners, Brownie, playing on the outside. Neither one you'd call sudden, neither one you'd call twitchy. They're not on the plus side of athletic for what you want for outside corners in the NFL.
Okay.
Yeah, so give us an idea. What's the vibe coming out of LA? I mean, they are in a division race. Nobody's running off and leaving it. Only one of these teams from the West is going to make it to the playoffs because of the record of all of them and what's going on in the rest of the conference. The Rams are within striking distance easily, with given the 5 games left. How do you see this division shaking out? I mean that. They got the nice win last week against the Saints, but they've still got some work to do.
Yeah. I think in an ideal world, Steve, and it didn't happen last week at all, and they actually had to come back, even though they were never behind big. I think in an ideal world, they would like to be one of those teams that jumps on you and gets ahead of you and then can rush the quarterback, because that's what they do best on defense, is rush the quarterback, because their pass rush front is Verse and Young on the edge, and they've got Fisk and Turner's a really good football player on the inside, and they are very multiple with their front looks. They stunt a ton. They make it really difficult on your protection. I think that's the way they'd like to play. They'd like to be able to get ahead and then let those guys, turn them loose, as it were. I'm not going to compare them to the old school Colts with Peyton Manning, but I think that style is, I think, what they'd like it to be. But they just haven't been consistent enough on offense. And I think, Brownie, you made a great point. Their O-line has been a big issue, and that's been hurting them in being able to do what they want to do, and I think need to do to be more consistent. But they do have people back now, although Avil at left guard, who was a second-round pick a few years ago, he struggled quite a bit. Now, I don't know if he's, came back too early. I don't know, but because I really liked the kid coming out, and I thought he was good as a rookie, but he's struggled a bit, and they've really struggled at the tackle position. So the O-line just has not been able to hold up, and Stafford is a quarterback. He needs the O-line to hold up.
Yeah, and to your point of how they would like to play, the biggest problem is they've scored 20 points all season in the first quarter. It's 30th in the league.
Yep.
So they can't get up on people. Now, one guy who has been able to score for them is Demarcus Robinson. Now, this is probably partially due to the fact that Nacua and Kupp missed time, but I feel like now with those two guys back in the lineup, he's taking advantage of a lot of one-on-one matchups against arguably an opponent's third-best corner. Is that what we're seeing there with him and his success?
To some degree. I mean, they do face a lot of zone. McVay's phenomenal in his route concepts and route design versus zone. The spacing. I mean, you're now in the next 2 weeks going to see two teams that in terms of route spacing in their combinations are as good as there is in the league. I mean, these guys do such a great job against zone because, as you guys know, defenders on the back end, they have more than one thing to do in their zone responsibility. So there's always a little bit of conflict and gray area. These are two teams that do such a great job of exploiting that. And the other point that you have to be really aware of, and it'll be on Milano and Bernard in this game, is they are heavy play action with Stafford under center. Again, the Lions are as well. So 2 weeks in a row, they're going to be facing the same kind of thing. But they're really heavy play action with Stafford under center, and they're good at it. So, you have to be really aware, Milano and Bernard in particular, that, hey, you just have to understand what you're looking at. It's, that's a homework thing during the week. You have to really understand offensive linemen and how they react, because if you start flying up there and creating that big void between the second level and the third level, that's where they really hurt you in the pass game.
How do most defenses, and Buffalo's included, how do they usually try and handle Nakua and Kupp?
I think you see more zone than man, for the simple reason, Steve, that there's so many cut splits. And as you know, it's hard to really play man against all those cut splits. So and corners, outside corners, are not used to playing man when a wide receiver is, 4 yards away from the offensive tackle.
Right.
That's not really the way they're used to playing man coverage. So you tend to see a lot more zone where corners are playing with width and depth, because so you see, and that's really what helps them in their route concepts, because they can run all those zone beater combinations that are so difficult.
Last one, Greg. I know Matt Milano is a guy you like watching. He was back in the lineup last week, had 5 tackles. Coach McDermott's assessment was he felt he got better as the game went on. What did you see on tape?
Well, unfortunately, Brownie, I wish that the visuals and my eyesight got better as the game went on, because it was kind of tough to watch that game on tape. I mean, I'm just being honest. It was really hard for me to get a feel. I mean, I'd love to make it up, but that's with the coaching tape we have, seeing it from a distance when the weather's like that, it was just hard. But I love Milano. He'll be better this week. Obviously, weather won't be an issue. I think he's a really important player in this game, because I think there's a savvy to him. I think there's an intelligence to him and awareness of how to play. I think he'll be really, really good in dealing with their play action pass game. I don't think he'll get stuck. I would expect him to really be an important player in this game, and he'll understand their route concepts. I find this game really intriguing, because I know, as you said, the Rams, they're only 6-6, but they've won 5 of their last 7. But it's a difficult offense to defend, and unless you can pressure the quarterback, and they may be able to do that. That's the deal. You got to be able to pressure Stafford.
All right, Greg. Thanks as always. Appreciate it. We'll catch up with you next week.
All right, guys. Thanks so much.